Looks like the Illini roster is just about set. So how good can they be? Locked on Illini, let's go.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Illini, welcome back to the Wednesday edition, a very special edition when you find out who my guest is. Thank you for making Locked On Illini your first listen every single day. Simple reminder, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Simple reminder, if you want to help support the show, I don't ask for anything. All I ask is for you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. This channel is growing, folks, and the best way for it to grow and to be seen by other Illini fans is if you send it to them. Send it to your former college roommates, your group chats, whatever it might be. It really does help out the channel, and I really think they're going to like this particular episode. Speaking of which, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right. For the most part, the roster is set. The Illini know what they're going to look like next season. Brad Underwood has brought in 9 new guys, and there's a lot of mixing and matching on what kind of lineups he can play. So how good is this Illini team going to be? Well, I'm not a very smart guy myself, so let me bring in what I consider an expert, Greg Waddle from the Sleepers Media Podcast. How are you, Greg?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about my Illini, our Illini. I feel like I'm an honorary member of this fan base, but yeah, I'm the negative Nancy right now. That feels weird.
So I want to start off with that. How would you describe your relationship with Illini fans?
See, I love Illinois fans genuinely. That's not a bit. There are some fan bases I definitely wouldn't say that about. I think of all of the big fan bases we interact with regularly, Illinois is the one that I tend to just naturally agree with or get along with the most. Like I would most want to be at a champagne bar in Legends sharing drinks with Illinois fans than any other fan base in the Big Ten, including my own fan base in Michigan. I don't know that they view me the same way often, but yeah, it's a very love-hate, 90% love, 10% hate relationship.
Yeah, no, I mean, you were kind of a natural for me to bring on for this show just because, Greg, you may not know this, but I consider this Illini team a very good one next year. In my opinion, good was saying they're going to be a top 4 team in the Big Ten. Apparently, that wasn't good enough for a couple people in my mentions over the last couple of days. And so, but, let's just get to it. Right now, in 30 seconds or less, how would you describe the offseason that Brad Underwood had?
Volatile, but like kind of expectedly volatile, right? Like they knew they were going to lose Terrence and Damask, and I guess they knew they were going to lose Coleman. It never seems like they made a serious attempt there. And then midway through the offseason, you decide to basically change out an assistant coach that is going to bring 2 players with him. Like this was Brad and staff agreeing, like, let's completely blow this thing up, which is not crazy surprising to me. But at the same time, if we believe everything Brad and staff said about what made last year's team so special, it was like great locker room, continuity, all these things that like winning programs need to have. They get over the hump. They have their best season in forever. And then it seems like we're back to the drawing board. Like, oh, forget all that. Let's ignore all the things we said about last year's team. Let's just get talent again. So, like, it's exciting. It's probably a very fun time to be an Illinois fan. And if my Twitter feed is a good indicator of how Illinois fans are feeling right now, they're through the moon about this. But there's a lot of high ceiling and low floor with, I think, almost every single player that they've added this offseason.
So, of the guys that we added, I think it's like 8 or 9 new guys. Who's your favorite? Who you think is going to be the best player on next year's team?
I think the safest bet is Kylan Boswell.
Sure.
He's the only guy on this team other than Ty Rodgers who has proven that he's starter level worthy on a good Division I team. Like that's the truth. And Look, Kylan is a kid that he reclassified. He's very young for his grade. He had a great start to the season last year on an Arizona team everybody loved. And then he was horrendous down the stretch. Like, the biggest reason Arizona really struggled in the second half of the season at times was because Kylan was not the player he was in the first half. And I have talked about it a bunch. Caleb Love has that effect on guards. So I think getting away from Caleb Love, we could see a completely different version of Kylan Boswell. And I'm going to buy in the talent. I'm going to buy that Brad Underwood wants to feature him, get the ball in his hands. And I think that's the most likely outcome. But, man, the interesting thing about Illinois is I think they're the only team in the Big Ten, maybe the country, that you could give me 7 different answers on who their best player is next season, and I would believe it.
Kylan's one of those players where it was just best for him to kind of depart and kind of start over. Obviously, he's back at home now. He's with, as you're probably well aware, we've got one of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the entire country in Fletch. And Fletch already has Kylan Boswell losing 20 pounds since he got onto campus. So Boswell's probably the safest guess. If you had to put money on who would make an all Big Ten team next year, it would probably be Boswell. I'm going to agree with you there. But we also have a lot of young talent coming in. Obviously with Kasparis, with Morez Johnson, now with Will Riley. How good do you think this team can ultimately be?
That's a really tough question. Look, they could win the Big Ten, and I would not be shocked. I think they would need some things to go right in the form of Indiana not living up to expectations and Purdue having some serious issues in the post-Zach Edey era. But those could happen. I'd be more surprised if Purdue isn't good than if Indiana bottoms out. So, those are the teams to beat for me. I think Illinois is in that next group, and there's an argument that there's 6 or 7 teams that could all claim a top 4 spot in this conference. I said it on our show the other day, but no matter who's in the lineup for Illinois, I think Brad Underwood deserves the benefit of the doubt to put him in the top tier, because all this man's done is win Big Ten games over the last 4 years. Now, he has always had supreme talent. Go through the last 5 Illinois teams. You had Ayo Dosunmu at the peak of his powers. Then you had Kofi Coburn at the peak of his powers. Then you had 2 years of Terrence Shannon. All of those guys at their time were a top 3 player in this league.
Sure.
I don't think there's a player on this roster that has a chance of being a top 3 player in this league. And maybe that's a little spicy of me, but if Kylan Boswell is the guy, I mean, that was Arizona's 5th best player last year, and him being bad in the second half of the season is what ultimately ended their season. So, I think you're hoping, if you're envisioning a world where Illinois wins the Big Ten, which, again, it's possible, I think you're hoping either Will Riley or Kasparis Jakashonis or, maybe even Morez Johnson could come in and really be better than they're supposed to be on paper. And if that happens, then I would buy it. If Kylan Boswell's the best player, I don't think you have the high ceiling of winning the league.
And that's kind of why I have us as a top 4 team. I think Illinois might very well have the most talent in that locker room compared to the other counterparts, the teams that you're talking. Well, maybe Indiana's got more pure college basketball talent, but you have the X factor of I trust Brad Underwood coaching a basketball team more than I trust Mike Woodson coaching a college basketball team. But right now, I don't know if that alpha is ready to take control and be the best player on Illinois. The following season, 1 or 2 guys come back. Obviously, you have Jeremiah Fears coming in. Who knows what happens with a guy like Jasper Johnson? But if you can also, get one of between Morez Johnson or Will Riley to return with that team, a senior Trey White, a senior Kylan Boswell, you're talking about a national championship capable winning team. But next year, I just don't know who that guy is, especially coming off the bat. I mean, we might go 6-5 with that non-conference schedule that we have. It's going to be very daunting, and it's going to be a lot of young players who haven't played together before. But
yeah, no, you're right. It's a gauntlet of a schedule. I've said this a few times, and people give me very strong pushback every time I say it. But I really would feel a little easier about this team, maybe a lot easier about this team, if they had just kept somebody that was like a program guy that's been around, whether that was Coleman or whether that was even like a Luke Goody, who, oh, by the way, went to the team that's picked to win the league right now. It feels like this team, the talent is there. They're deep as hell. They got 11 different guys that can play. You're not going to be shocked by any of them starting. You're not going to be shocked by like 7 of them being the best player. But there is no continuity, and there really isn't a lot to rely on. Like, if we went individually through these guys, they all have a high ceiling, no doubt. They also have immensely low floors. Like, Trey White is coming off of a year with the worst team in high major basketball, horrible locker room, and he wasn't as good as Sky Clark on that team. Okay? Kerry Booth is a guy who's leaving a surefire starter spot in a perfect system for him with Micah Shrewsbury, who was also a horrible team last year, to presumably ride the bench in Illinois. I don't know what that's about, really. That you got a bunch of overseas guys. They can be great. They might not be. I don't know anything about them. Like, Ty Rodgers is kind of like the glue of this whole thing. And I think at times Ty Rodgers was a liability last year. So it is really strange. I do question, like, what exactly is going on with the culture of this year's team. I don't question the talent. It's Brad Underwood who's going to have to figure it out. And the reality is Brad's really good. So he probably will figure it out, and people will probably clip this, and I'll look very stupid.
No, I mean, I'll say, I'm a big Brad Underwood. I know you are too, but yeah. I trust the guy. Trey White, of course, yeah, he struggled a bit last year with Louisville, but he's a college player who's got 55 starts under his belt. He had a very good freshman year for USC. I think he's going to be able to provide a little bit more of what Brad is looking for. Luke Goody, it would have been nice to have him back, but I think Luke also had, higher aspirations of like guarantees of like what his role was going to be on next year's team. I think Brad knew that he had to really kind of revamp this roster. And so maybe he couldn't make the promises and the NIL promises that Luke wanted. Now, granted, when we play them in February, if he goes off for 4 3-pointers against Illinois, and, that's a deciding factor in the Big Ten Conference, we can revisit this conversation. But it's, I think I'm a little higher on some of the guys. I agree with you. The floor on this team is low, but, as you said, I talked about in yesterday's episode, I think we have 4, maybe 5 potential NBA guys in this locker room. And that's just not something Illinois has had in a really long time. And yesterday, during the media session, Brad Underwood kind of pointed that out. He's like, that 30-0 run was not fun. They knew they had a good team, but they knew that they had to upgrade that talent level to become a national contender team. And I think that's what the motivation for this offseason was.
So I want to pick at that 5 pros thing real quick, because this has been, we did a video on this afternoon, and I've been fighting people in our Discord about this all day too. I understand the point about, like, we think our roster upgraded its talent, but to me, you upgraded your talent like 3 through 13. Like, you're deep. You're really deep. Last year's 8th best player is worse than this year's 8th best player, but only 5 guys can play. There is not a player as good as Terrence Shannon on this team. I don't think there's a player as good as Marcus Damask on this team. I don't know if there's a player as good as Coleman. Maybe one of them will be. Kylan Boswell last year was not as good as Coleman Hawkins. So, it's hard for me to process the contingent of Illinois fans who are sitting here saying, we got a way more talented roster. And when that number of 5 pros is thrown around, I understand there are probably 5 players who, like, if a 10% outcome hits, they get there. But I want to know what 5 you're actually talking about. Because to me, it's Kasparis for sure could get there. Will Riley is like automatic one and done.
Sure.
I think Merez gets there one day. Outside of that, like, it feels like a stretch to say that Kylan Boswell is going to get drafted.
Sure, but Kylan Boswell is mocked into NBA drafts in the future. I guess that's what I'm kind of talking about.
But where? Like, I understand, like, NBADraft.net, which updates their thing once a year and is entirely focused on 2024, has had him mocked since he was a high schooler there. Nobody who watched Kylan Boswell at Arizona has him anywhere near the NBA draft right now.
Sure.
Like, he hasn't averaged 10 points a game in college.
Okay, fair enough. I will say, and I know this is kind of a cheap argument, him being 19, but Kylan Boswell is the guy I'd put at maybe 4 or 5, right? We talk about Will Riley. We talked about KJ. I'm actually higher on KJ than I am anyone else that's coming into this class. At 6'5", 200, I think he's going to be an easy first-round draft pick. Now, whether it's next year or the year after, that I don't know. But that's why I'm continuing the conversation in the sense where I don't know how next year's team's going to be, but I'm super excited about the year following. Morez Johnson, the motor's there. We know he's going to be a good college basketball player. Is he going to be able to develop that extra level to make it to the NBA? That's what we're going to kind of see. Kerry Booth has NBA skills. He didn't necessarily show it his first year. He was a 4-star, former Notre Dame. He's going to be coached by Orlando Antigua now. Orlando's one of the best big men developers in all of college basketball. So, yeah, he may not be able to play the amount of minutes he originally planned on doing next year. And of course, there's always a threat of transferring when something like that happens. But should he decide to stay, I do think he's learning from one of the best big man developers in the country. And for that reason, I still consider him a possible potential pro.
Okay. I mean, I guess if we add it up that way, but like, I don't know how Morez and Kerry Booth both get on the path to be pros. Like, one of them is going to have to play at the expense of the other. It just feels really stretchy to me. And I said this on our show, but like, when you start to break down individual players like this and you say like, this roster is more talented, this roster has more pros, I think it's really disrespectful to how good the great players that have come through the program have been for 6 years. Like, and I understand being a good college basketball player is a lot different than talent. In fact, my coach just got fired because he wouldn't win games in college with NBA talent. Moussa Diabate, Caleb Houston, Jet Howard, Kobe Buffkin. Yay, that was fun. We won like 22 games in 2 years combined. And it's cool. It's good to have NBA talent. But also, like, there's 2 guys on this team that are seriously considered potential first-round picks. And it's going to happen with Will Riley for sure. He's great. And he wants to be a one and done. That's why he's at Illinois. I'm with you on Kasparis. I see the upside with him. Mm-hmm. With guys who didn't even score in double figures on teams last year in college that are getting a year older and don't have a clear, obvious role, it's really hard for me to hear like, we have more pros because Kerry Booth's on the roster. So this is the best roster Brad's ever had. He might not even be in the rotation next year. And we're talking about him like he's an NBA guy to paint the roster as better. And I don't mean to condemn your take because I know it's a lot of people that agree with you on it. Yeah. But I just would push back strongly. Like, just because these guys are on mocks a couple years down the line does not mean the talent level upgraded even year over year, because you got 3 guys who left last year's team that I think would be the best player on this year's team.
But it's not like, they didn't try to replace the Terrence Shannon with a guy equal to him. They went after AJ Storr. They went after David Jones. They went after these guys. It just didn't quite work out. So I think now we're at the point where Brad Underwood had to kind of adjust his strategy a little. He went after Danim out in Spain. Things didn't work out. And KJ ended up being the fallback. And I'm not convinced that KJ may not be the better college basketball player than Danim ultimately might end up being. But all in all, I get your point. I do get what you're saying. I do got to take a break real quick. But right after this, we'll kind of talk about how we might see the Big Ten turn out next year. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Network. This episode is also brought to you by Gametime. I'm a big Cubs fan. I like to go to Wrigley as often as I can. That opportunity won't come forth very often after this move in about a month. But when I do go, I use that Gametime app. It's very simple. All you do is create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, just create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we're talking about next year's Big Ten season. dare I say, the three most talented teams are probably the Purdue, Indiana, Illinois. So, Greg, let's pretend that we're simulating next season 10 times. How would you divvy up how many times each of those three teams wins the conference? And feel free to add a wild card.
Oh, this is a really tough question. I have to double down on my stance that I've had the last couple of weeks. I strongly believe Indiana's roster is significantly ahead of the other two. And I know that's become a big fight on Twitter with Indiana versus Illinois today. To me, if you were picking who's the best player from both teams combined, Oumar Ballo, Malik Renew, and Mackenzie Mbako would all be undoubtedly the best player on Illinois. And from there, it's kind of a toss-up of if you like Boswell or Miles Rice better. I understand Mike Woodson is a liability here in trying to win a Big Ten championship. I just think this roster is so talented that he can't really get in the way of them. Shooting is a question, but depth is not to me, the same way we say Illinois is really deep. Luke Goody is 2 spots lower in the depth chart for Indiana than he was with Illinois last year, and Illinois was really good. So I would say Indiana would win the league about half the time. And I know I'm in the minority on that, but I really believe their roster's that good. I would probably give Purdue 3 of the other 5 because Matt Painter is awesome. And I would give Illinois the other 2 because they're right there. I can't really see another team outside of those 3 seriously making a run at winning the league.
Yeah, I think those 3 are really the only teams that'll probably have that opportunity. I see things a little differently, though. I think Purdue's floor is just so high that, again, if you run it 10 times, they're the ones who have the least amount that they're going to screw up. Indiana, the Mike Woodson thing, I just don't know if I trust him quite that much. Illinois, I don't know if the talent level is where it needs to be to win a conference necessarily next year. So I think Purdue has the most margin of error. And so I'll put them at 5. I'll put Illinois at 3. And then I'd put Indiana at 2. And I concede that Illinois and Indiana is kind of it's a cross. It's like, do you prefer the better coach who I trust more with the talent in the locker room, or do I trust that super loaded locker room? They get off to a rough start. Those Hoosiers are going to get on Mike Woodson. There's a lot of people wanted him gone last year. So with this loaded roster, with how all out they went with the NIL, I just don't know if Indiana can really afford to get off and running with a rough start.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, Woodson was bad last year. Woodson also, let me make sure I get this number right. Woodson's roster was the problem last year. They won 19 games. They were a game back in the win column of Michigan State. They finished the season with the same amount of wins as them. They just didn't make the tournament. So, I don't think he's horrible. I don't think the floor is as low as people are making it seem. And that was essentially without a point guard, right? Because Xavier Johnson got hurt and Gabe Cupps was not playable at all. Now they have a bunch of guys who are better than that. And I make this point all the time to kind of pester Purdue fans. Mike Woodson is 500 against Matt Painter in the Zach Edey career. So, Purdue's had better rosters with the National Player of the Year, 500 against Mike Woodson. I don't think he's as big of a liability as people are making him out to be, and I do believe this roster is a step ahead, but your answer is a perfect answer too.
All right. Today, when you're watching this, is going to be the NBA draft, and Greg's going to be involved with a really fun project, which we'll talk about right after this. All right, NBA draft time. Illinois does have one potential draftee, hopefully in the first round. Before we start on that, Greg, you guys are doing something really fun. Can you tell the audience?
Yeah, it's ambitious and it might be a disaster, but I'm more excited for this than anything else we've ever tried to do. So we're hosting a live watch along on our YouTube channel. We are affectionately calling it our Draft-a-Palooza. We have invited 22 special guests along with us that include some of the biggest players in college basketball last season. To name a few, Tristan Newton and Alex Caravan from UConn, Hunter Dickinson at Kansas, Braden Smith from Purdue, Luke Goody from Indiana and formerly Illinois will be there, Jeremiah Fears and his brother Jeremy, who plays at Michigan State. Jeremiah is a big Illinois recruit. Coleman Hawkins and Great Osibor will also be involved in the show. So all of these people have confirmed their time slots and say they're showing up. I'll kind of believe it when I see it because I can't really process that we got that lineup. But it should be a really, really fun time. It'll be live starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and it'll run through the remainder of the first round.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I saw your guys' promo for it, and there's a lot of big names, like you said. But, all credit to you guys. Sleepers Media is arguably the hottest name when it comes to college basketball right now. You guys are throwing out content constantly. Love you or hate you, you guys are respected. You guys really do put in the work, whether, people like the results of that work all the time or not, that's their discretion. But let's just kind of wrap up real quick, talking about the NBA draft. We're all hoping Terrence Shannon Jr.'s name is going to be named in that first half. Pretend you're his agent. You're Terrence Shannon Jr. Give a 30-second spiel to an NBA GM on why he should be drafted high.
The talent speaks for itself. You can watch the highlights. There is no player who is as dominant downhill, as physically ready at the guard wing position in this entire draft, including the wings and guards that will be taken in the very top 10. And if you want anything more about who this player is and what he can be for your locker room, look at all that he went through. I don't know that there's a player that has ever played college basketball and any player in NBA history that has been put through more adversity than this young man. He handled it with grace. He handled it with maturity. He kept his head down and worked and led Illinois to the greatest season they've had in Brad Underwood's tenure. He is a no-brainer, cannot miss guy that will help every single team in the NBA.
Why might he not be, let's say, mid-round pick, in case you haven't watched any of the previous episodes? I think Terrence Shannon Jr. is a perfect 3-and-D guy for what the NBA has essentially become. At the NBA level, he's not going to be counted on to score. Obviously, if you just tell him, hey, focus on the opposing wing's best offensive player, Terrence can do that. He's had an NBA body for 2 seasons now. His shooting has gotten better. I think then we don't have to worry about him making a career out in the NBA. So actually, let me ask you another question. Does Terrence Shannon Jr. make it to a second NBA contract?
I think he does. I really do believe it. And look, situation is so much of it in the NBA. I know this from the many Michigan players that some did and some did not reach their second contract in the last decade. But the ones that didn't really got drafted in situations that hurt them. Like Nick Stauskas comes to mind. He's had 60-point games in the G League. The dude can hoop.
Yeah.
He never really got a great look because Sacramento drafted another shooting guard the year after him and kind of wiped away into mediocrity. And the ones that did, like, I think got opportunities and found teams where they could play complementary. I look at Franz Wagner and what happened to him with Orlando. Paolo Banchero going to the Magic is the best thing that ever happened to him. So I do think it'll come down to situation, but like I said, Terrence is a kid that could go to all organizations and immediately be a valued contributor, even if he's not on the floor, with what he can bring from a maturity standpoint. So, I will never doubt that kid again in anything in life.
Exactly right. What kind of team do you think would be the ideal suitor for a guy like Terrence?
They don't have a first-round pick, which is really frustrating because it's a dream fit, in my opinion. But if he could somehow stumble his way to the Indiana Pacers, I mean, imagine the transition-oriented offense that they run, and Terrence Shannon is added to it. I think he'd be the best asset they have in that up-and-down system. There are a lot of other teams that will run as well, but in that case, it would have to be a trade, or God forbid he fell to the early second. Indiana could make a play. If it's not them, I would love to just see him on a championship contender, because I think there have been a lot of guys that were on the court in big roles in the NBA playoffs this year that, really became like 4th or 5th option guys that were not half of the player that Terrence was in college. And, you could envision him very easily being put on like a Denver or a Boston or even a New York. They just got Mikal Bridges tonight.
I saw
and kind of just have an easy job, like rim run, catch and finish, shoot your open threes and guard, and he would be great in that role.
Yeah. Selfishly, I'm a Bulls fan. I'm also a Terrence Shannon Jr. fan, but I don't want that connection together. They had him in for workouts. I think Terrence, he's 20. He's going to be 24 years old by the time the NBA season starts. Put him on a team like Philadelphia, or I think you mentioned Boston, a team where he can go in, just be another guy. He know his role, be surrounded by a good culture. The team's not counting on him for anything, I think that's going to be the role that he's going to excel at. But whatever it may be, we're all going to be enjoying watching the NBA draft tomorrow. And Greg, one more time, will drop a link in the description, for your draft show. But just quickly mention again what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's the NBA Draft-a-Palooza live on the Sleepers Media YouTube channel. 22 special guests from all over college basketball. We've got coaches, players, guys who could be drafted tomorrow night are going to make quick appearances for us. So it's Carter, myself, Brian Ralph, and Riley Davis from Heat Check who are helping us out with that on the Sleepers Media YouTube channel, 7:30 p.m. Eastern through the entire first round of the NBA draft.
All right, Greg. I hope this was harmless for you, and we can bring you back on sometime.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Greg. There you have it, another completed episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you, Greg, for joining me today. It was fun. Definitely make sure you tune in to their live Draft-a-Palooza. I'll certainly be watching and chiming in the chat at some point. They got a lot of talent they're bringing on, but it's deservedly so because they are some of the hardest working guys in media right now. And so it was an honor to have them on. It's also equally an honor to have you guys watching. I'm just telling you guys, I appreciate everything that you guys do. I don't ask for much. If you don't mind just hitting the like button, hitting that subscribe button, this channel is growing so incredibly fast, and it's all because of you. And I cannot tell you just how grateful I am for it. Today, we'll have the NBA draft. Hopefully, Terrence Shannon Jr. will have his name called. If not, we'll kind of talk about what possible destinations he might have on tomorrow's episode. But until then, ILL love you guys.